Today on Locked On Canadiens, let's talk about where this team goes from here.
You're Locked On Canadiens, your daily podcast on the Montreal Canadiens, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi there, everyone, and welcome to episode 1053. And today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side, and it is a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go now, free, on the App Store and Google Play. My name is Laura Saab, also known as the Active Stick, and I am joined, not as always, by the wonderful Scott Matla, but I'm joined by the equally wonderful Ian Boisvert of the Build podcast. And Ian admits to also being as competitive as I am. Ian, thank you so much for joining me tonight to kind of go over the presser and talk about where the team goes from here.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. I hope Scott isn't on his way to Salt Lake City. He's not getting relocated. I think he'll be back soon.
That's my hope, because I will miss him otherwise. But speaking of Scott being back, we do have a show on Saturday. We will be doing a live show, and we'd like you all to join us. It'll be before the Rocket game and after the PWHL game, so we'll have plenty to talk about. And remember that Saturday is 420. And Ian will be joining us hopefully as well. We've invited Ian to join us, and he's going to try his best to make it. And it'll be on the YouTube, and we invite you to join us, and we'll put up the link and everything so you can be ready for that. In the meantime, the Habs season is over. If Arizona gets a point tonight, then the Canadiens will have the fifth best odds
Correct.
at getting the first overall pick. And then if they don't, then we can't be worse than six. So the Canadiens are in a pretty good position. But today was all about the locker cleanout, the press conference, and all of that. And Ian, you and I both listened to the press conference in preparation for this show. Like, what was your overall takeaway from it?
I'm still completely caught off guard every time one of these takes place because of how non-combative they are. We're so used to these being, just a fight between the media and the general manager. And I'm always just kind of, for lack of a better word, charmed by Jeff Gorton. Like he's always trying to crack a joke. He's always trying to make people feel comfortable. There was the clip of him from the draft coverage video where two scouts were getting into a pretty heated argument. He comes up behind one of them and starts rubbing his shoulders, and he's like, "Oh, we got to get you a steak." Like, he seems like the kind of guy who's really comfortable in his own skin, and that really helps in a market like Montreal. So just my main takeaway every time him and Kent Hughes meet the media is just how comfortable they look up there, and how, almost at the end they thanked the media for their work this season. I don't remember that happening ever. I was kind of baffled by that in a good way. That's a professional thing to do.
Right, absolutely. And that's one of the things I was going to say is, speaking of that sense of humor, Kent Hughes was talking about when he was thanking the media, he's like, none of you can be as annoying as Jeff Gorton. Like, that was essentially what it was. And Jeff was like, I understood that. But I love that they're so at ease. You're talking about how comfortable they are. They're at ease with each other. And they're at ease in their positions, right? They don't seem too overly fussed. And I think that is incredible because these two are clearly people with a plan. And no matter how crazy we were going throughout the season, getting angry at the penalty kill or getting annoyed at this or that or the other, they're not really deviating from their philosophy or their plan. And I think one of the things they were quiet, they were calm throughout the season. And we were all tearing our hair out over Marty and his tactics. And is he good at this? And is he good at that? And then at the end of the year, you're looking at it and all three of these people were right. We'll talk about Marty more in the second segment. But, all of these players that they noted all the players and the steps they took forward, and also how much more clarity they have about what they want the players to do in the off season to get ready. Right. So I think that was, for me, one of the most positive aspects of it. They gave a lot of good answers. They said a lot of promising things, but they seem to be pretty comfortable with their own plan. like comfortable in their own skin. They're not getting overly excited or overly fussed. They know they have a job to do. They've decided on their path to it, and they're not going to get lost in the minutia.
Yeah, and they acknowledged that, this summer and the next summer is the hardest part of whatever they're trying to do, right? Like they've stockpiled assets. They have a great young core at the NHL level. We learned this season that Nick Suzuki can be the guy to lead a team. Um, now
I
it's
just got goosebumps when you were saying that.
I mean, it was something that, a lot of people questioned whether or not Nick Suzuki can be a number one center. I think he can be, especially when hopefully you've got a guy like Kirby Doc right behind him. I would take that 1-2 punch, assuming that Doc comes back healthy and his progression continues. But I was also caught by, how certain Kent Hughes was in saying that Slavkovsky's probably going to stumble again, and that they're okay with that. That progress isn't linear, especially when it comes to developing hockey players, and they're fully understanding and expecting him to fall on his face again. And the thing that's going to make him a star in this league is how he learns to pick himself back up. That's going to be huge because I agree. I agree. I don't think Slavkovsky's going to score 80 points next season. It would be cool. I just don't think it's going to happen. He's going to be 20, 21. Um, but like, you know, how can he pull himself back up after, going 5, 6 games without a point? So it's going to be really fascinating to see what they try to do to tinker this summer. It kind of seems like they're looking at something big, right? Like they kept mentioning how, they're at a point where they have assets and good players, and the next logical step with that is to exchange some of those assets for more good players. So we'll see what happens. I'm really excited for the summer as much as I'll miss watching the Canadians play hockey, especially Lane Hudson. I miss him already. Like that was the two. I think those were the most fun 2 games of the season because especially the second one, because every time Hudson touched the puck, the Bell Center vibrated. Like
Right.
that was incredible.
And having that kind of player on the team again is so great. And I love that, they talked about him and they said, we don't know yet if he's going to need a stint in the AHL or not. But the fact that they're prepared to have this conversation and they're not going to rush him is
Yeah.
so incredible to me because I mean, at some point, you talked about it with Slavkovsky, he's going to stumble, right? At some point, Lane Hudson, right? Like he's going to have issues. There are going to be growing pains.
Yep.
But how the Canadians deal with it, it's how he handles himself, but also how the Canadians deal with it going forward. That's really going to tell us how his trajectory is going to go. Like, players bear a lot of responsibility, but so does the organization. And I think one of the biggest thing I want to talk about before we switch over to talking about Martin St. Louis is they are adamant that whatever happens, whether they get a big player or not, they are not willing to sacrifice that long-term goal of being a perennial contender just for sniffs at the playoffs in sporadic seasons, which I think is so important because as much as, people have complained this year and they have, like we've been reading the complaints, we've been talking about it, we've been complaining ourselves. As much as that's been going on, like the thing is we don't want to have another couple of decades where the team as a whole is mediocre and then there's some flash in the pan successes, whether it's a nice deep run or whether it's a run all the way to the final or anything like that. We want the Canadians to be the kind of team that we can be confident when the season starts they're gonna make the playoffs and they're gonna make some noise whether they win or not. Like we can have faith in that team. And I think that the fact that they refuse to sacrifice that in favor of small gains is so important.
Yeah. No, completely agree. And it's I think next season the playoffs are going to be a lofty goal. They're going to try. Like I don't think that they've ruled it out as an expectation. We'll see how the beginning of the season starts and if in game 2 we lose any of our core players to a devastating injury again. Um I completely like but outside of that, right? Like next season lofty goal, make the playoffs. In a few years, the goal isn't going to be to make the playoffs. The goal is going to be win rounds.
Win. Yeah.
The goal is going to be win the conference, win a cup. Like that's what and that's why I think having Marty and having Kent Hughes and having Jeff Gorton, they see a larger picture here. They've kind of taken a step back. That's what these few years have been. I know it's been, really just a tank fest the last few years, but in reality, like it's allowing them to see what they have so that they can use those assets that they've stockpiled to go get the top line player that they might need. Like I always use Vegas as the example for the Canadians because I kind of think like if Montreal can make a trade for like a Jack Eichel, that's the kind of trade that I would love to see the Canadians make when they're ready to make it.
Right,
There's
and
no
not
reason to
before
rush
that.
this. Right.
Yeah, yeah, and I absolutely agree, and you did bring up Marty, so I do wanna talk about one of the big announcements from today, which is Martin St. Louis' option, has been extended, and he'll be here for 2 years longer, and that's all coming up in just one moment here on Locked On Canadiens. But first, this episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. Now, I've talked about it. I am absolutely competitive and I get so lost in games, and I love doing that. And my competitive side is a huge fan of Monopoly Go. I'm sure you've heard of it because it's been downloaded over 150 million times. It is a great twist on Monopoly where you play on not one, but hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations, building up amazing cities that bring you big money. But the best part is you get to mess with your friends. I charge my friends rent on my iconic properties, just like in classic Monopoly. But now I can also heist their vault of riches for myself. And the leaderboards show me who the biggest Monopoly tycoon is. And spoiler alert, it is me. I am always winning. But it's not just my competitive side that loves it. You can team up with friends and people all around the world in time tournaments to earn huge rewards. It is truly, like, honestly, this is a great modern twist on a classic game that everybody loves. It really does bring out the strategic competitive side in you. And it's just like the fact that you can kind of, build your own worlds in it is just so, so great. So you should get in the game and join your friends and me. Download Monopoly Go now, free on the App Store or Google Play. All right, let's talk about the big news from today, which is that there was an option on Marty St. Louis' contract. The Canadians have taken it and they will be extending him for 2 more years, which means that he'll be here 3 seasons more. And I know that some people might have some mixed reaction to this because we have had moments throughout the season where we have doubted Marty. But I think one of the key things is that each individual player has found something in his game. Even the ones who have struggled have kind of been able to identify their own faults. I mean, we talked to, we haven't talked about it. Sorry, we will talk about it. But Josh Anderson in his press conference talked about, how much he knows that his season has not gone right, and this is going to be a big off season. But just looking at Nick Suzuki's step forward, just looking at Uri Slafkovsky's breakout, just looking at all these players taking step forwards and certain elements of the team getting better, I think that's one aspect of it. But also the management talked about how players want to play in Montreal. They're hearing all over that players want to sign in Montreal. They want to play in Montreal, and they do believe Martin St. Louis has something to do with it. So, Ian, where do you stand on this extension?
I mean, I'm all for it. I really love Marty, the player. I loved Marty St. Louis as a player. I really love him as a motivational guy. I think he knows exactly what buttons to push when it comes to his players. Um, I I I think he fits with I think he fits with the personalities of Kent Hughes and Jeff Gorton really well. Um, you know, so I know a lot of people don't know if he can be the coach that wins the Stanley Cup in Montreal. And to that I say, let's worry about things once, right? Like we're not winning a cup next year or the year after. Maybe not even the year after that. We're not worried about that right now. Um, when they get to that stage, if they determine he's not the guy, he won't be the guy. But for right now, he is the guy. I think he's the absolute best coach for this team. Um, I really, you know, is he a tactician? Not exactly. And Kent Hughes, it said he's still learning. He's a better coach today than he was when they hired him. So I think that I think that the organization is just enamored with the guy, and rightfully so. Um, I wonder if the rest of his coaching staff could use some tweaks, but it seems like they're pretty happy with them as well. Um, special teams are going to need to improve over the next few years. I think that'll be a big part of their development. Is they focused on 5-on-5 for the past few years, and we need to get a power play that doesn't make us want to reject the penalty.
Mhm.
So, and I don't know if coaching fixes that. I don't know if getting better players fixes that. But I think Marty's just the guy right now, and 3 more
The right
years
guy
isn't.
right now.
Yeah, 3 more years isn't an eternity, and I do think that he'll stick around at the end of that. But for people who are questioning whether or not he's going to be that guy, I say, don't worry about that yet. We're not there yet.
Right. And I think that's such a healthy attitude to take, especially as a sports fan, because sports is not that deep, as we always say on this podcast.
No.
It's not that deep, right? So, like you said, let's worry about that bridge when it's time to cross it, right? Like, that's not something that we should worry about now. And I think it's very telling that Kent Hughes acknowledged that Martin St. Louis is still learning. Like, because that's something that
Yeah.
we've said all along. Like, we have had problems with his decisions. And I think it's totally fine to disagree with some of the things that he's done or has done in in-game situations. Like I feel like he has like so many strengths about micro moments in the game, like little plays or little
Mhm.
strategies and stuff like that. So then when you're seeing in the game, like, he taught this guy at a practice to do a thing. And then you're seeing in the game, well, okay, like you can teach the guy, but like when it comes to like the opponent, why aren't you responding in the right way or something like that? And it's like you got to think about it. Like this guy is so new at this, and he came and started doing this from pretty much nothing, right? Like he had not
Yeah.
coached before. He'd played. He had not coached before. So, I think it can't be discounted the fact that the organization has this kind of faith in him and they have acknowledged, right? Yeah, he's learning. Like that to me is saying, we know that it's not at the optimal position, but we have faith that we're going to get there. And I think the players themselves, imagine you got rid of Marty right now. Like all of these young players that you're trying to make your core, that have all this faith in him, that are so motivated by him, that love him so much that like to the point where they were like when he surprised them in Colorado, like they were so overjoyed
Yeah.
after he had taken that leave. Like I find that like that's not a good way to build a relationship with these young players, that not only do you want to be part of your core, but you also want them to not be too expensive when you're in contention, right?
Right.
That's another thing. Like people have to want to be part of the Habs, and one of those reasons is Marty. And it's very much like you said, and Scott has always predicted too, if they don't want him to coach anymore, they'll still keep him around. He'll still be doing something, whether it's in player
Yeah.
development or as an AGM or something. He likes to coach, but you never know. That conversation might have to be had. I do have questions a little bit about not adding a more experienced person. Like somebody like talked about it really disdainfully in response to the presser today. I don't necessarily know if like maybe right now is not the time to do that. Maybe right now we're trying to get our players to be the best players they can be, and then maybe the tacticians and the more experienced people and those guys come in later.
Yeah. No, I think that's a perfectly reasonable way to look at it. I don't know that, there's I don't it's funny, like people always say, well, they should bring in a tactician, and then they don't have any examples of somebody that they should hire.
Yeah,
It's like they're all of those guys are in other assistant coaching jobs.
right,
You're not prying them out for a lateral move.
right.
Um, you
And I
know,
think one thing that what I am conscious of is a lot of the times, like the Montreal Canadiens will be the first team to hire a French speaking coach.
mhm,
And then, he kind of cuts his teeth in the Montreal Canadiens organization, and then he goes elsewhere and becomes a coach elsewhere. And then when it's time to hire, that's a requirement. So like they look around the league and they're like, okay, well, there's these four guys we can hire, right? Like I think
yep,
adding some brand new blood to that, like your pool, like your hiring pool, your coaching pool, like I think that there's nothing wrong with that. Like they're doing the same thing that they feel the responsibility to do as a franchise, but they're bringing in new blood for that, and completely new blood, not retreads, not some guy that like, everybody knows his name and they know who he is, so everybody just assumes he's a good coach, which I
yeah,
hate when people do that, like
sure.
GM decisions like that. So I feel like Martin St. Louis, like this will not be the end of his time in this organization if 3 years from now they decide to go a different direction.
Alternatively, hiring Kirk Muller a third time would be pretty funny. Maybe this time we can make it work. I think this is the one.
this one time.
Yeah.
And honestly, like I do think there is something to be said about, you don't necessarily need to bring in a whole new coach for special teams, but maybe you can have consultants. Like there's tons of data you can get now. There's tons of companies that like will provide you with data. They'll provide you with analytics. That'll provide you with strategies. They've got an analytics department as well. So
Yeah.
there's stuff that you can do that doesn't necessarily involve hiring a specific coach, but it's like you said, like we do need special teams that don't make us want to cry every night. I think that's
Yeah.
important.
Yeah. Agreed. Agreed.
And we did see, with Uri Slavkovsky, like being played more on the power play, we saw an improvement. It didn't dramatically change, but we definitely saw an improvement. There were more high danger chances. There was a goal once in a while. There were fewer shorthanded goals. So I
Yeah.
think, like the personnel will help as well for
Agreed.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think like Kirby Doc coming back, that's a big part of this. I don't know if he would necessarily penalty kill. I wouldn't be surprised to see him out there. But there were periods of time where the penalty kill was really good this year. I think for most of March it was like unbeatable.
Yeah.
Um, but then there were other times where Nick Suzuki would take a penalty and you would go, "Oh, they're absolutely getting scored on," and then that's exactly what would happen.
Yeah.
Um, so there's your penalty kill can't be one guy.
Yeah.
It needs to be a team effort.
One guy and half a goalie. Like,
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
so yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And there are little things, and over the course of the off season, there's going to be so much stuff we could talk about, and we can get really into the nerdy minutia. And we hope, Ian, you will join us for a bunch of that stuff. We've got
Mhm.
draft stuff, we've got off season stuff, we've got free agency stuff. But in the meantime, we are going to turn our attention over to Laval. We're going to talk about 4 players that were assigned to Laval, a little bit how they did in Montreal, and hopefully we're going to cross our fingers for the next 2 Laval playoff games, and that's coming up in just one moment here on Locked On Canadiens. First, I want to tell you about a Policygenius, because you know what? Life insurance is so important. You got to protect your family. You got to give them that safety net. But when you're trying to find the right policy on your own, it could be a little bit overwhelming. With Policygenius, you can find life insurance policies that start at just $292 per year for $1 million worth of coverage. Some options offer same-day approval and avoid unnecessary medical exams. Honestly, it's so convenient, so time-saving. You can easily compare quotes from America's top insurance in just a few clicks and find your lowest price. There are award-winning agents that will walk you through everything you need to do. And your work life insurance policy might not offer enough protection for your specific family's needs, and it might not come with you if you leave your job and go somewhere else. Policygenius gives you unbiased advice from a licensed expert support team. They have no incentive to recommend one insurer over another, so you can trust their guidance. Thousands of 5-star reviews on Google and Trustpilot from customers who found the best fit for their needs don't lie. Check life insurance off your to-do list in no time with Policygenius. Head to policygenius.com/lockedonnhl or click the link in the show description to get your free life insurance quotes and see how much you could save. That's policygenius.com/lockedonnhl. And all right, so let's talk about the Laval Rockets. So obviously, these players were either papered to Laval or were already on the Laval Rocket at the time of the trade deadline, which will enable them to play in the playoffs should Laval make the playoffs. But first, they got to do it. I think the first player that I want to talk about, because he was sent back down to Laval, he is injured, is Joshua Roy. I think he had such a phenomenal season, both in Laval and in Montreal, and I really hope that he's going to be able to play, if at all possible. And did you
I
find him
I
to be as much
believe
of a revelation? Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I believe he is cleared. So
Oh, he's cleared?
I think Joshua was good to go.
Okay, I thought he
Um,
was day to day. So
yeah, I think I
yeah,
had because it was in the same announcement, right? Like they said that
right.
they sent 4 guys down, and also Joshua was healthy. So I
I
really
got the
enjoyed him.
4 guys down, and then the Joshua was healthy. I feel like that should have been a separate headline in itself.
Yeah, yeah, they really buried that one.
It was
Um,
day to day. Like last time I
yeah,
checked, it was day to
no,
day.
absolutely.
Yeah,
I love Joshua a lot this year. I think he didn't step in and light the world on fire, right? Like he's
yeah.
still very much developing, but what he showed was a lot of poise with the puck in the offensive zone. um I really do think he's got a decent shot, really good playmaking skills. Maybe we're looking at him on the second line next year, third line, somewhere in that area. There's going to be a lot of competition for spots, especially amongst the forward group next season. So it'll be interesting to see what the Canadians think he is, right? Like, um, if they wanted to sell high on him, the opportunity to do that has already not already passed, but when he was standing next to Connor Bedard at the World Juniors, like that would have been a chance for them to do that, and they didn't. They clearly see something in this player that they want around.
Right.
Um, so I'm excited for him, to step in and maybe become some secondary scoring that the Canadians will very much need moving forward.
Mhm.
So yeah, it was fun seeing him. I'm glad he's healed up from his Brendan Gallagher-esque hand injury.
Yes. All right. So our next player is Justin Barron. And honestly, I'm going to be honest with you, Ian. Scott and I differed very much on how his season went. We were in agreement that he didn't do as great as we wanted him to do in Laval. There were, some issues there. But when he came to the NHL, like I feel like Scott thought he did a phenomenal job. And I was just kind of like, it's Justin Barron. Like,
Yeah. No, and I
um,
get it. Kind of depends on the shift, right? Like, like he's kind of a different player every time he touches the ice, for better or worse. Um, I got to see him playing for Laval down in Hartford, and it was just like it just seemed like nothing was going his way. The puck was just not. He was fighting the puck. He was in bad position a lot of the time. Um, I think the Canadians still think highly of the player, but I wonder about his um, NHL future. Not that I
right.
don't think he can be an everyday NHL defenseman, but like, is his
What is he going
floor
to be?
right? What's his floor, and what can he cap out at, and what's the you know within the range of those potential outcomes? What's the most likely one? And on a team like Montreal, where they seem to have figured out their defense for the next long time. Um, he's a player that he might be running out of time to make that kind of impression, which seems
Right.
unfair because he's not. It's not like he's an older guy. It's just there's a lot of competition back there for spots, and
Right.
they can only play 6 of them, and they're only going to carry 7 or 8, and even those guys are just going to be sitting. So he needs to put up soon. He needs to figure out like how he's going to make an impact. Make a role for himself. I don't really know what kind of player Justin Barron projects to be at this point. Like, is he a puck mover? Is he, an
A shot
offensive
blocking
defenseman?
guy.
Yeah, like what does he do? You got
Yeah.
to do something differently.
Yes. That's an interesting question. Maybe we'll try and answer that over the course of the offseason. What does Justin Barron do?
Yeah,
Um, and then we have Logan Mailloux. I think, that's pretty self-explanatory. He was one of the most important players in Laval. I think, the call-up was more related to him having done whatever work and homework the Canadians gave to him.
yeah.
He did have a good game, obviously, but I feel like that was more like he's a player on Laval. He's an important player for Laval. He's been that all season. So like I don't see it as him being sent down.
No,
And then we have Jaden Struble. And Jaden Struble to me all season was better than I expected. I was excited about him, but he showed a dimension to his play that I didn't know was there.
so Jaden Struble got called up like late November, I think. And
Never looked
he
back.
was yeah, and it was like, "Yeah, he'll play a few games, we'll see what we have," and then he just never went back. Like, it's such an awesome story for a guy that, like, we thought probably needed a few more years in the AHL to develop, to just show up and be, like, really good. Um, he's like, a nasty player. Like, he's angry, he does, like, Hulk smash throws people on the wall. Like, I really enjoy what he brings to the back end, and he's got like a nose for offense. Like, he jumps up in the rush from time to time. His first NHL goal was like a deflection on the rush. Like, as a defenseman, that's hilarious. So I was constantly just blown away by the player. Just really, like, it seems like he took a lot of the development into his own hands, and then he forced the Canadians' hand. He said, "You're not sending me back," and they didn't. Now they're going to, because he can help Laval make the playoffs, but not because he's being demoted. He's an acquisition for Laval at this point.
Exactly, and then, like, I really hope he gives them a boost. It would be fun to see them in the playoffs, and honestly, I'm excited to see what he does next year. I really hope that he can continue to build on this and get confidence. And then, the Canadians have this really tough question about they've got these three guys that bring similar things, and they're so good. Which one of them do you choose? Right?
Yeah.
You want to choose Jaden Struble? Do you want to choose Kovacevic? Do you want to choose Jordan Harris? Who do you trade? So, but that also at the same time gives them trade chips, right? Like Jeff Gorton was joking and saying, "Are the players listening to this press conference when he got asked about, what assets are you keeping as your core?" But I think that's such a good question, and the Canadians have an embarrassment of riches. And I'm really excited for the next couple of years as well as the off season to break all this down. Ian, I want to thank you for your time and for being here. I want to tell everybody subscribe to the Build podcast as well. Please join us for a live show on this Saturday, 4/20 at 5:30 p.m. Eastern. We will be here and Ian will be back. I promise. We always get like really positive thoughts when Ian's on the show, so we'll have him back ASAP. In the meantime, do not forget that tomorrow's our mailbag. You can send questions on Twitter at LO_Canadians. You can also send emails at lockedoncanadians@gmail.com. You can put questions in the YouTube. Just put mailbag question or MBQ. You can find Twitter. You can find Ian on Twitter, not Twitter. You can find Ian on Twitter at maybe it's Ian. You'll find me at The Active Stick. The show's at LO_Canadians. Subscribe, tell your friends, get on the Locked On Canadians bandwagon, and I will talk to you all tomorrow.